Welcome to the School Leaders Podcast. My name is Dr. Gastridharrigan, the podcast for current and emerging school leaders, those who support and supervise them. You will hear from passionate educational leaders who are transforming their schools, communities, and creating positive outcomes for students. I will also share my personal reflections and tips from over 15 years as a school leader. Together, we will talk about how to level up our schools and leadership practices. Hello, welcome to the School Leaders Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Gastridharrigan. Before we get started with today's episode, I want to encourage all of our listeners to join the School Leaders Podcast community on Facebook. There, we continue and extend our conversation from the episodes. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you could be notified whenever a new episode is released. Today, I have a special guest, Zach Groshell. He's an instructional coach in the Seattle area. He's also an experienced elementary teacher. Zach holds a PhD in education and presents often about cognitive science and educational research. Zach's recent contributions include evidence-based presentation for Think Forward educators and InnerDrive's Cognitive Science Network. He also just came out with a book on assessment and feedback with the title Amplifying Instructional Design. Zach also hosts a podcast called Progressively Incorrect and maintain an active professional presence on Twitter. You can contact and reach him at Mr. Zach G. And he has a blog, educationrickshaw.com. Join me in welcoming Zach to the School Leaders Podcast.
Thank you for having
Zach,
me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Zach.
Well, as you said, I'm an instructional coach in the Seattle area. A lot of people don't really know what that means, like what an instructional coach is. Not a lot of districts have the same model, but basically in one middle school, I am there as an instructional leader to provide feedback and mentoring of new teachers as well as old teachers. I'm in classrooms, I'm observing, I'm giving feedback and going through sort of coaching cycles with teachers to try to improve achievement. And for us, a big focus is improving classroom management and behavior. So that's what I do. Other than that, though, as you said, I'm involved with a lot of different projects. I love cognitive science and research-informed pedagogy. So I'm often blogging and talking about that.
Okay, that's awesome. You know, you are correct. Each district and county have different models for instructional coaches, literacy coaches, we call them down here. We have math, science, and literacy. So each district has their different model and use it differently. But talk to us a little bit about your journey, because I read about that you started teaching abroad. And so talk to us about your journey teaching abroad into becoming an instructional coach, and what are some of the lessons you gleaned from that experience?
Right. Well, I never really intended to leave and go overseas and teach in private schools. I was really sort of invested in this community here, working in public schools. I was actually working in a Native American tribal school in this area, and I really sort of became part of that community. But a friend out of nowhere who is living in Vietnam and teaching in an international school contacted me and was like, you should come out here. By the way, we're getting paid a bit more. I have 2 hours of planning a day. My kids are angels, right? They do exactly what I say. And you get to see Vietnam. You get to travel on the weekends, go on, spring break, go to different countries around the area in Asia. And so for 7 years, I sort of stuck to that, working in private international schools, serving communities that are full of like sort of wealthy parents, diplomats, business people, children of that type of crowd. And I never intended to leave that because it was so fun. Hence the name of my blog, educationrickshaw.com. I was living in Sudan and there are yellow rickshaws everywhere. But I returned and I'm back here mainly because of COVID, and I'm loving my job right now. I'm loving I'm loving just sort of being figuring out American education once again.
Thank you for sharing that. You are correct. And, as a foreigner myself, it's always interesting comparing the U.S. educational system to other educational system across the globe as it relates to the competencies. And also, I'm always intrigued how we take the international model. And we use that for mainly our advanced kids. But thank you for sharing that. Yeah, instructional coaches play a critical role in our schools. I have a literacy coach, I have a math coach, and I have other instructional support that also do one-on-one support. And oftentimes, principals and school leaders struggle to not only support them, to help them become better instructional leaders to support in the classroom. We're going to dive, and to all of you listening, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that. But from your experience as a current instructional coach, how can principals and school leaders be themselves better instructional leaders to support these instructional coaches?
Right. Well, we're in a really weird time with instructional coaching. I feel it's a role that's being increasingly adopted across, many different schools are adopting these. And then when you have an instructional coach, what do you do with them? It's sort of like when the devices came out, right? It was like everyone's going to have an iPad, and then all of a sudden it was up to the people implementing it to figure out what are we going to do with these things. I have a hard time with right now the current status quo in instructional coaching, that we focus a lot on sort of the instructional coaches generic, what I call generic leadership skills. We're excited about we want to make them better problem solvers. We hope that if they use this instructional coaching cycle better, they will address a lot more problems in their contexts. There's an issue with this. And the issue is that just like a doctor needs to have huge, deep funds of knowledge about many different ailments and diseases in order to diagnose problems in their contexts, instructional coaches need to have a really deep knowledge of how learning happens, and what teaching can support really great learning. And we get into this problem where we're trying to train these instructional coaches like myself to analyze problems, to meet with teachers and facilitate discussions around teaching. But many instructional coaches don't really know what to look for when they get to classrooms. They don't really know what to say when they get in those meetings, and they don't really have a foundation. They're not really grounding their decision making in evidence, in how learning happens, cognitive science. So for me, I think a better starting point than maybe some of this leadership stuff is around cognitive science. How does working memory work? Why is it so limited? How do students get overloaded quickly, and how can we prevent that? What is retrieval practice? How can we get students to cement those understandings deeper and not forget as quickly? How do we interrupt that learning curve? So this is what I do talking to my mentees, to my teachers, is I'm looking for certain things because I come with assumptions from the evidence. If I could change anything about instructional coaching, it would be that instructional coaches become experts in how learning happens and how to help that learning happen.
It's critical. You just said a whole lot that instructional coaches need to be experts in understanding how learning happens. What are your recommendations for principals and districts, especially districts like big districts like myself, like the district we are in, and across the nation, to have a lot of instructional coaches? And often the only requirement is you probably go through a couple of meetings and you were a good teacher. So how do we scale things up and build capacity, build our coaches' knowledge, and help them become an expert in order to really help teachers in the classroom?
Well, I first will say I do not think a couple of years in the classroom is enough. When I started instructional coaching, I was 8 years a teacher, and I felt like I had nothing. I didn't have what I needed, and I probably should have stayed in the classroom longer. I got out, and now there's no looking back. But really, they need to have at least 5, 6, hopefully 10 years of experience. But that experience, we know what confirmation bias is, right? That experience isn't everything, right? If I was training instructional coaches right now, I would get them in a reading group, reading something like Daniel Willingham's "Why Don't Students Like School," which is like a primer, chapter by chapter, of principles of how learning happens. I would start with there, but there's so many. We're in like a cognitive science revolution right now. There's so many resources we could go to. One is How Do We Catalyze Learning by Peps McCrae, and another one that I really think people ought to read is How Learning Happens by Kirshner and Hendrick. These books can be really easy if we're already at a stage where we have instructional coaches. Really easy book club starters. And then the principles themselves, even though the role is expanding for principals beyond what I think is even appropriate, principals themselves have got to lead that change. They want their instructional coaches to be upskilling and learning about cognitive science, about evidence-based practices.
And I think what you just said is key, right? We as principals and school leaders need to take the time to become better experts in effective instruction and how students learn. And what you just said is critical. I know for us, every other week as an instructional team, we do walks together. And the idea of these instructional or learning walks is that, number one, we are calibrating what I'm seeing, what the instructional is seeing, and we were returning back. And for us, it's not just about one teacher. It's about trend across the school. And it's about also ensuring that my coaches who are in the classroom coaching and modeling for teachers, we see the same thing. And I'm not always right, but at least we see and calibrate and get on the same page and have the same look fors. And from there, use that data to drive PD, to drive instruction. I will also find books that as a team, maybe we have a gap in this area and we do book studies. So that way we can fill in those gaps to better support really the instruction that's happening in the classroom. Because we know the research is clear, right? That instructional leadership coupled with effective instruction in the classroom improves student learning. And so for leaders like me who work in urban districts, who kids come in, I'm at the secondary level, who are reading really 2-3 years behind, it's imperative that the adults, right, from the coach, from the school leaders, the assistant principals, deans, down to the teacher, are implementing effective leaders. So with that said, with principals and school leaders have to be instructional leaders, how do you see and what are some of the ways really leaders, principals can really work with their coaches to help them become better coaches? Earlier you talked about the coaching cycle. What do you recommend to school leaders that are listening to help their coach become better coaches? Because at the end of the day, we need to build capacity in the classroom with our teachers.
Yeah, well, I mean, this might sound small, but it's probably everything. I would really start as a principal with making sure that my coach is active in the building. The first complaint I always hear, because I've switched schools a couple of times, the first thing I hear when I come into teachers is, hey, that last gal or guy before, they were stuck in their office. Like, I never got any help from anyone, right? I really do think instructional coaches can't forget, like, what was your workload when you were a teacher? Try to replicate that as an instructional coach. I try to leave dehydrated and sweating just like I did when I was a teacher, right? Get out there and get into classrooms. That's what my principal wants me to do. And she's amazing. I hope she listens to this. But, Zach, get out there and get into classrooms. And we sometimes bump into each other into her observations all the time. We're suddenly dual observing because we're in classrooms. Another thing I think we need to be wary of is that many instructional coaching models have teacher-coach confidentiality. And I would hope that if you're in that model where the principal is not supposed to really infringe on that confidentiality, that confidentiality is kept, that it's held sacred. For example, my principal and she says, how are things going? And I'll talk in general about some things I'm seeing, patterns, but I'm not going to name drop Mr. Smith and Miss So-and-so, because those discussions we're having, those observations are it's important to maintain those relationships within this model. Now, if you have a different model where it's more directive coaching, where the coaching is really trying to really turn around a school quickly, I can imagine that the coach and the leadership are going to share notes more closely. But in my particular situation, the teachers need to know that they can trust that their discussions are safe with me, and I'm not going to go tell on them, right? And I guess if I could put a third thing in there for leaders is allow your coach to lead up. Like I really do lead upwards, and I say, like, I think this will work. I'll give you an example. In our 6th grade hall this year, the students were just coming in. 6th grade's the first year for us. They were coming in really squirrely. They were sort of COVID babies, right? And they really did not know how to treat the school right. They were bumping into each other in the hallways, smashing into each other, abusing the bathrooms. The first thing that, that I really thought to do was I led up. I went to my principal and I said, look, we got to do something. We implemented, because of me having that trust and that relationship with the principal, we implemented a system basically where the teacher would signal outwards when their class was basically out of control, and our dean and me could come and intervene. And that quick intervention, the students sensing that their behavior cannot go above a certain level, just with a flip of a card on a window is how we did it, really brought down some of that energy. And now our 6th grade group, our cohort is performing really well. But that was me kind of stepping from that instructional coach into a building wide capacity, kind of building wide leader, and the principal saying, hey, Zach, roll with this. You got to fix 6th grade floor.
I think that's important. There are two things you said that connected and resonate with me. You talked about that coaches should have trust and confidentiality. And I think that's very important, that as you coach your teachers, that they are able to trust that if they are vulnerable with you, they are working in a specific area, that they trust that you're not going to run to the principal, their struggle or areas that they really are struggling in. And I think for all the leaders listening, that's very important. I often say to my coaches, listen, whatever the conversation, dialogue you have a teacher, respect that confidentiality, because that's where you got to build that trust and that culture of learning, and really, I like to say, messiness of learning. So that way, there are things sometimes when I remember when I was in the classroom, and often they would say, well, they'll come in and they'll see something going well, but often is I've been trying that strategy. I've been trying it until I fine tune it for my style, personality, and for those kids I have, because some strategy work well in the morning, after lunch in the afternoon, it may not work as well. So I think having that trust is very important. The other thing you indicate is leading up. And I think that's very important, being able to step up and take advantage and see where areas of struggles and lead to fix and address those specific areas. Now, with that said, when I got there, students were not learning, achievement was low, to where now it's over 89% graduation. We moved from the teens to 89, over 89 percentage points. We have an effective rating with the state based on the test scores. But when I came in, it was unsatisfactory, and we had to make some changes. So I value and respect that coaches must, and for every coach listening, develop that trust and confidentiality to coach their teachers in a safe space. My question for you, Zach, is when is the right time, or when is it okay when you're working with a teacher and they are not performing, and that you need to step out and say, hey, to your leadership, to your principal, to your AP, that, hey, listen, you may need to take a look at this classroom because kids are not learning, and this class is not moving based on our instructional focus. When do you think is when it is safe to really step out and inform your administrator?
Well, I mean, before anyone does anything that's listening to this, that goes against their school policies, look at your district school policies first, right? But for us, really, I feel it's appropriate to pass on that information when the classroom is not safe, right? And we have that situation all the time. I feel like I'm in the same school as you were before you arrived, right? We're in a turnaround situation, where things can get out of hand quickly, and one class in one hallway can send the message to everyone in the hallway that it's okay to mess around with your learning, right? And we can have situations where an explosion of students are coming out of this one classroom, and it's contaminating basically an entire section of the school, right? So in these cases, I mean, I may not even say the teacher's name, but the principal will know who I'm talking about, right? I will say, we really got to work on these 2 classrooms in this hallway. I've been in there every day, and at this point, right, I'm not teaching this class. They may respect my authority because I have a radio, but the minute I leave, it's returning, and the behavior is just, it's not stopping. Well, right down the hallway, you have another teacher who is handling their business and with the same kids. So this might be a teacher capacity issue, and right now I can't solve it. That's happened several times,
I do value, like your answer to all the coaches and other leaders, you do need to maintain and help your coaches maintain, because I often say to my coaches, don't come and tell me what's happening really before you tell me how often you've been in the classroom, like you mentioned, Zach. What are the kind of support? Have you been in there and model for the teacher? Have you met one-on-one? Don't just have them come to your office. Go and live inside their classroom, making sure they're getting the support that they need. Because at the end of the day, it's about that support. It's about the coaching, using that instructional coaching cycle to ensure that we're improving and providing the necessary support. And at the end of that, you mentioned building teacher capacity. That's the key thing. Now, you just came out with a book, Amplify Learning, a global collaborative, Amplifying Instructional Design. Share with us some of the main points or the message from the book or from the chapter that you wrote.
Right. My chapter was all about feedback and assessment, which really go hand in hand. And I'm working on a lot of different writing projects. This one was super fun. Basically, before I started writing it, I knew a lot about how we take in information and a lot of stuff about cognitive load theory. But I was asked by a friend if I could write this chapter about feedback and assessment, and I said yes. And it allowed me to take a big deep dive into how we best give feedback to students. A lot of feedback we give to students is very corrective, sort of yes and no, sort of a check or a minus, you're wrong or you're right. And that feedback does work. It's just not very effective because the student doesn't come away knowing why they did what they did wrong, right? They don't know why. It's sort of like a computer-based program saying yes or no. They know they got it wrong. They'll try not to get it wrong again, but they don't know what they need to do next time to not get it wrong. So a lot of times we need to think about feedback on a sort of a spectrum of very sort of low level corrective feedback, yes or no feedback, all the way up to what they would call an elaborative or an epistemic level of feedback. So I try to coach teachers that when we're giving that feedback verbally, right, we're putting in there a little bit of why this is that it is, and maybe even asking a question like, I see that you did this. Why did you do that? And in dialogue with the student, what comes out is that they didn't understand what they were doing, and you can then provide some of those inputs, right? So feedback being on a scale like that. Another thing about feedback, which is quite interesting, is that a lot of people think about it like it's great if there's just more, right? We're just going to give as much of it as possible, and then something will stick. Really, with feedback, the evidence can be negative and it can be positive. We really need to think about feedback in terms of, is it moving the learner forward? A lot of our feedback is just about improving their product. It's about like take a 5-paragraph essay, for example. I can put a bunch of marks on a 5-paragraph essay. The student can then rewrite it with the exact marks that I put on. Their paper will improve, but do they know how to write better as a result of that experience? Probably not, right? So we really have to shift our mindset around feedback, that maybe more is great, but that's not really the solution. The important part is the learner taking this themselves, taking it to heart and using it for something new? And so a lot of the chapters around that kind of discussion, how to build in and embed a steady diet of feedback that is epistemic, elaborative, and moves students forward, as opposed to kind of just throw in lots of feedback and sort of lower level corrective feedback.
That's critical. Feedback is crucial. And I think John Hattie, in his various books and research, talks about the importance of feedback and the impact it has on learning. And I found that in my 19 going on 20 years being an educator and over 15 years as a school leader, that often teachers struggle with providing effective, specific, and targeted feedback. So if you could expand a little bit, is there a specific, I know there are different models, there are specific models, protocols that you have found that that can really aid teachers in providing more specific feedback and helping students use the feedback to ultimately improve learning?
Yeah, well, if we can divide feedback into two types of feedback really quickly, this might be helpful. You can give individualized, personalized feedback to students, and you can give what we could call whole class feedback. Now, most people will appreciate that when you personalize feedback, it tailors it to the learner in front of you. The learner might be sort of lower on the academic spectrum, and you can target it directly to their skills. A higher learner, you can extend their learner. That's all true. I'm not here to say the personalizing feedback is bad, but we do have to admit, when we talk about personalization, we have 30 students. So if I meet with one student and then I meet with another, and each of those is 5 minutes, 5, 10, 15, 20, after a bit of conferencing, you start to find that you're stretched thin. You're not giving as great of feedback. Your feedback is untimely sometimes. It's too late or it's too early. So, and what is everyone else doing while you're doing these little conferences, right? In some schools, this is a great time to mess around, to bully others, to sneak our phone underneath our table, and a bunch of other things, right? So if we look at that whole class feedback, I'd love to share some tips on this, because I wish this were the new trend in feedback in education, which is we can give the whole class in that tier 1 situation. We can give a whole class 3 points of feedback that most students in the class deserve to hear, right? Maybe not everyone, but they could benefit from hearing that whole class feedback. And so teachers should personalize feedback. They should get out books and mark some stuff, right? But you can increase the amount of feedback you give, and you can make it so that most kids are paying attention to it, and it applies to most kids by delivering it whole class. One is to take someone's work and to live mark it, with the student's permission, live mark it in front of the whole class. Everybody goes, oh yeah, I did the same thing. And you're pointing out, see how I noticed other people's work did the same thing. Another one is strategic sampling. So I take 3 books from my class. I go strategically, that's a low, that's a medium, that's a high. I take those 3 books at home and I look over them and I make a bunch of notes. And tomorrow's lesson is based around those 3 books. And I'm basically going to give feedback to the whole class around things I saw from those 3 books. And finally, another one I would say is front-loading feedback, like doing front-end feedback before the kids even do it. Predict, because you're a subject expert, predict what most kids tend to do wrong and tell them, hey, most kids tend to do this. This is what you should do instead. That way you're preventing situations where you need to intervene. You're kind of putting out fires before they happen. So if those are helpful, I hope they are. But that's kind of a lot of what I think is important about increasing feedback and improving the amount of the intake of feedback in your class.
I think that is extremely invaluable. I also, like you just said, examples that you talked about, giving them samples, taking one or two students' paper, and with their permission, obviously, and providing that live feedback that is really applicable and can be applied across the whole classroom becomes very critical. And for those writing assignment, using rubrics and, like you just say, front loading, by sharing those type of front loading with a rubric, well-written rubric, the expectation to look for becomes very, very important, because then students know what the assignment about, what are the exemplars if you provide those, so that becomes crucial and very important. Now, the audience for my listeners are emerging and current school leaders. Often, when I say emerging, sometimes they are coaches looking to move into administration, or current assistant or principals who are looking to either move up or become better experts in their specific practice, in their specific school. How can school leaders and principals support teachers who want to lead beyond the classroom as instructional leaders? Maybe they don't want to go to administration, but maybe they want to go district wide, or they're in the classroom, they want to become a coach, or they're a coach, maybe they are ready now to maybe become a district coach or state coach. How can school leaders support them?
Right. Well, I know what my leadership did, right? And that's what they raised my voice, they raised my profile, they centered some of the things I was saying, right? I was working at a school in which we were going to adopt a new literacy curriculum, and a lot of stuff coming out. I'm sure some of the listeners have heard Sold a Story and heard about the reading wars, but this was sort of maybe 5 years ago. So the podcast, Sold a Story wasn't out, and a bunch of this stuff wasn't on our radar nearly as much. But the principal knew from talking to me, he knew that I was into research. He knows my computer's full of this stuff. So he came to me and he said, I just need you to really facilitate this adoption. I want you to find some research, and I want you to work with the other people in this crew, because we really can't go to a whole language model at this school. And I know that that's kind of popular amongst some of the people on the committee. I need you to sort of raise the points. I need you to do some of that research. And when I heard that, I'm like, wait, I'm just a teacher. Like, why, but I feel like it makes people feel empowered, and it makes them start to consider future possibilities. When I got into that sort of facilitation role, I realized that at least it felt from the feedback they gave me that I wasn't stomping on toes. I wasn't hurting people's feelings. I felt really successful. And it's sort of, when you feel that success, you say, like, right, that's the type of leader you want. You want someone who didn't just become an instructional coach because they were tired of managing behavior or whatever else. You want someone who felt successful with their student teachers, who's really good at leading committees, who's out there, who's involved, who's excited about teaching, and find those people and raise their profile and raise their voice. Thank you, Adam Dodge of Nanjing International School, my principal, who did that for me, and I never looked back.
I think that's awesome to find those teachers and put them over committees, put them over different subcommittees or committees, whether it's at the school level, whether it's at the district level, elevate and scale up their voice and empower them to really lead as experts that they are. As we wrap up this interview, and thank you for coming on, I've really learned a lot. Share with us your favorite book or quote and why.
Well, I mentioned Daniel Willingham's book, Why Don't Students Like School? It explains chapter by chapter the mechanisms we have in our mind, but not in a very neuroscience-y sort of chemical way in which we're talking about the myelination and synapses and things like that. Really concrete examples of how information needs to be presented and retained and so on. And one of the quotes I like there is that memory is the residue of thought. And that's that what students remember is what they think about. And so much of our instruction distracts them away from what they're thinking about, maybe diverts them or entertains them in a way, or overwhelms them. And they're thinking about their struggle, they're thinking about their failure, where if they're thinking about the things you want them to teach them, memory is the residue of thought. What will stick in mind are the things that they really were considering and processing and thinking about.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Tell everyone listening how they can connect with you.
Right. Go to educationrickshaw.com. It's a funny name, but it's a funny website. There you'll see my podcast and my blogs and my guests. I do a lot of projects on there. Educationrickshaw.com. You can contact me through there if you want to work with me on something. And Progressively Incorrect is my podcast. Great guests are coming on all the time. I hope you come on sometime, Gastrid. Otherwise, I'm on Twitter, and you can see me battling it out there.
Thank you so much for coming on. And I do recommend, we've connected through Twitter, and your website, your blog has plethora of information. Your podcast is awesome. So to all of our coaches and instructional leaders and current leaders that are listening, definitely check out his website, check out his podcast. You definitely will. It's very informative, and you will definitely gain a lot from his website and podcast. Thank you, Zach.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today. Please consider subscribing to the podcast. Leave a 5-star rating and a comment. Share this episode with a friend and on social media. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for leadership ideas and tips. Again, thank you for joining me today. Until next time.